I never thought my quiet little town would turn into a battlefield. I never thought my own neighbor would push me past the breaking point. And I definitely never thought I'd be standing in front of a smoldering barn, the smell of burned corn in the air, wondering just how far HOA Karen was willing to go. But that's exactly what happened. It all started in the early summer, when the corn was just starting to peak above my knees. I live on a decent stretch of land, not a massive farm, but big enough that a corn barn makes sense. My family's been in this town for 3 generations, and the barn, old, red, and proud, was more than just wood and nails. It was history. It was the heart of our property. My daughter grew up playing hide-and-seek in it, my father stored his harvest there, and I planned to pass it down to her one day, but Karen never cared about history. She cared about rules, her rules. She wasn't just any neighbor. She was the neighbor. You know the type, clipboard in hand, eyes like a hawk, always patrolling the neighborhood like she was some kind of self-appointed sheriff. And unfortunately for everyone else, she was also president of the HOA. Now I've dealt with HOAs before. Some are fine, some are annoying. But this one? This HOA was Karen's kingdom, and she ruled it with an iron fist and a shrill voice. The first letter came on a Tuesday. A bright yellow envelope tucked under my door handle. Inside, in bold capital letters, it read, "Your barn does not meet HOA standards. Please repaint immediately." I stared at, half amused, half annoyed. My barn wasn't some decorative garden shed. It was a working structure. It had chipped paint, sure, but it was strong, sturdy, and perfectly functional. Besides, I owned my land outright. The barn stood there long before Karen ever bought her little house on the corner. I ignored the letter. 3 days later, she showed up in person. I was outside, fixing a loose board on the fence, when I saw her marching across my yard like she owned it. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to slice the summer air. "Have you read the notice I left?" "I did," I replied calmly, not even looking up from my work. And it's a barn, Karen. It's not supposed to look like a Christmas card." Her face twisted like she'd just bitten into a sour lemon. "The HOA has rules, and everyone must comply. That barn is an eyesore. It lowers property values." I put down my hammer and finally looked her in the eye. "Karen, my barn's been here for 50 years. If you don't like looking at it, don't look." Her lips pressed together so tight they practically disappeared. She turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering something about non-compliance. I should have known then that she wouldn't stop. The second notice came a week later. This one threatened fines $200 for every week the barn wasn't up to HOA standards. I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. I had bigger things to worry about than Karen's petty power trips. But then the gossip started. A neighbor down the street mentioned that Karen had been knocking on doors, complaining about my property. She told people my barn was dangerous, that it could collapse any day, that it was a fire hazard. None of it was true. But Karen knew that if she repeated something enough times, people would start to believe her. I tried to stay calm. I told myself she'd eventually get bored and move on to someone else. But deep down, I knew better. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange, I saw her again. This time, she wasn't marching up to my door. She was standing at the edge of my property, staring at the barn with this look, a mix of disdain and determination. Like she'd already made up her mind about something. I should have confronted her then, but I didn't. A few days later, I woke up to the acrid smell of smoke. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor burning leaves, but the scent was too strong. My chest tightened. I threw on my boots, stepped outside, and froze. Flames. The barn was on fire. I sprinted across the yard, yelling for my daughter to stay inside. The crackling roar of the flames drowned out everything else. Heat blasted against my face as I grabbed the hose and turned it on full blast, but it was useless. The fire had spread too fast, too strong. All I could do was watch as decades of history turned to ash before my eyes. Neighbors gathered at the fence line, whispering, pointing, some even filming with their phones. But in the crowd, I spotted her, Karen, standing there with her arms crossed. Not a trace of shock or sympathy on her face. And that's when it hit me. She did this. She actually did this. My hands clenched into fists as the barn collapsed inward with a thunderous crash. Sparks shot into the night sky. My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. Every fiber of me wanted to march across that yard and demand answers. But I held back, because Karen didn't know who I really was. To her, I was just another homeowner, another target for her power games. She had no idea that by burning down my barn, she hadn't just crossed a line, she had set herself on a collision course with someone she should have never messed with. I'm not just a homeowner. I'm not just some quiet neighbor who shrugs off harassment. I'm a federal judge. And in my courtroom, people like Karen learn real fast that actions have consequences. But Karen? She was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The smell of smoke lingered in the air for days. It clung to my clothes, my skin, even the curtains inside the house. No matter how many times I showered or washed, I couldn't shake it. Every time I looked out my kitchen window and saw the blackened skeleton of my barn, a fresh wave of anger rose inside me. But anger wasn't enough. Karen had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And while part of me wanted to storm over to her house that night and demand justice, the judge in me, the part of me that had spent years weighing evidence, sorting truth from lies, and dealing with people just like her knew better, Karen thought this was over. She thought she'd won. But she didn't realize she had just walked into a fight she couldn't possibly win. The morning after the fire, I stood at the edge of my property, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, staring at the ruins. A few neighbors walked by pretending to be casual, but their eyes gave them away. Curiosity, suspicion, fear. They wanted to ask me what happened. But no one dared. Except for old Mr. Henderson, who lived 2 houses down. He shuffled up with his cane and a frown. "Terrible thing," he said, his voice gravelly. "Barns don't just catch fire like that." I nodded. "No, they don't." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I saw her out there that night, Karen. She was lurking by the fence just before the fire started. That confirmed what I already knew. Still, I kept my expression neutral." "You sure about that?" "As sure as I am about my bad hip," he said. "She hates that barn. Always said it ruined the neighborhood." I thanked him, but I didn't say more. As much as I appreciated his words, I couldn't rush to accuse her. Not yet. Not without proof. Later that afternoon, I noticed Karen herself strolling past my property. She wasn't trying to hide her smirk. She actually waved as if mocking me. "Such a shame," she called out, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "Maybe now you'll build something that fits the neighborhood aesthetic." I gripped my mug so hard I thought it might crack. But I didn't respond. Instead, I gave her the calmest smile I could muster and said, "We'll see, Karen, we'll see." That smile unsettled her. I could tell by the way her smirk faltered for just a second, before she walked on. What she didn't realize was that while she thought she was done with me, I was just getting started with her. Over the next week, I began gathering quietly. First, I called in a friend and old colleague from my federal days who owed me a favor. He arranged for an independent fire investigator to come by, someone the HOA couldn't influence. The man walked the property carefully, his eyes sharp, his notepad filling with scribbles. When he was done, he pulled me aside. "This wasn't an accident," he said plainly. Accelerant was used. Whoever did this wanted it to burn fast. That was the first nail in Karen's coffin. Next, I reviewed my own security system. I'd installed cameras years ago, mostly for peace of mind. But the angle facing the barn had been blocked by overgrown shrubs. Still, one camera near the driveway caught something interesting, headlights pulling up late at night, stopping for a few minutes, then pulling away right before the fire broke out. The car? A silver SUV. Guess who owned a silver SUV? Karen, but I wasn't going to run to the police with half-baked evidence. I knew better. People like Karen were slippery. They twisted stories, manipulated neighbors, painted themselves as victims. I'd seen it 100 times in court. If I made the wrong move, she'd spin this into a tale where I was the aggressor, the unstable neighbor lashing out. No, I needed to be smarter. Meanwhile, Karen strutted around the neighborhood like a peacock. She told anyone who'd listen that the fire was tragic but inevitable. She claimed she'd been warning me about the barn for months, and now her predictions had come true. She even suggested the fire might have started because of my negligence. The nerve of her. One evening, I overheard her talking to another neighbor near the sidewalk. He thinks he's above the rules, she said. But now maybe he'll learn. This is what happens when you ignore the HOA. The neighbor nodded nervously, not daring to challenge her. Karen had that effect on people. She bullied them into silence. But not me. I spent my nights in my office, piecing everything together. The investigator's report, the video footage, Mr. Henderson's eyewitness account. Slowly, a case was forming. And when I'm building a case, I don't miss. But I wasn't just building this for the police. I was building it for me. For court. For the day Karen would stand on the other side of the room, pale and trembling, finally realizing who she was up against. She thought I was just a farmer with a barn. She thought I was just another neighbor she could push around. She had no idea that I spent my life delivering justice. And soon, I'd deliver it to her. The breaking point came when I received a letter from the HOA signed by Karen herself. It stated that because the barn had been destroyed, I had 30 days to clear the remains or face escalating fines. She burned it down. And now she wanted to fine me for it. I laughed out loud when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd it almost didn't feel real. She'd gone from petty to criminal, and now she was doubling down. But that letter? That letter was her undoing. It tied her to the fire more than she realized. I pinned it to my corkboard beside the investigator's report and the photo of her SUV headlights. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. Karen thought she had power because of her HOA title. But power without wisdom is a dangerous thing. And soon, her little empire was going to crumble. The night before I made my move, I stood once again at the edge of my property. The barn was gone, reduced to ashes and charred beams. The moonlight cast long shadows across the field. I whispered to myself, tomorrow, the real fire begins. Because tomorrow, I'd stop playing defense. Tomorrow, Karen would find out exactly who she had picked a fight with. She thought I was just a neighbor. She waved. Spent most of my life listening before speaking, watching before acting. Judges learn quickly that the one who rushes loses. And Karen? She was rushing headfirst into her own downfall. The morning after I promised myself I'd stop playing defense, I got up early, ironed a crisp shirt, and walked straight to the HOA office. That place was Karen's throne room. A beige building with fake potted plants in the lobby and a smug receptionist who clearly worshipped her. "Is Karen in?" I asked calmly. The receptionist gave me that practiced smile of someone who'd been trained to say no. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, leaning forward just enough. "But she'll want to see me." Something in my tone must have gotten through, because 5 minutes later, Karen emerged from her office, lips painted too red, eyes glittering with self-satisfaction. "Well, well," she said, feigning surprise. "Come to discuss rebuilding? I have pamphlets on barns that actually fit HOA standards." I smiled. "Not quite. I came to talk about the fire." Her expression twitched, barely noticeable, but I caught it. She masked it quickly, plastering on a fake look of concern. "Yes, such a tragedy. I warned you that barn was unsafe." I let the silence hang for a beat, then leaned in. "The investigator doesn't agree. He says accelerant was used." Her painted smile froze. "Accelerant?" "Yes, gasoline to be precise. Which makes this arson not an accident." For the first time, Karen faltered. It was just a flicker, her eyes darting sideways, her fingers tightening on the folder she carried, but to me, it was enough. I didn't push further. Instead, I stood up and said calmly, "I just thought you should know that people will be asking questions soon." Then I walked out. The trick wasn't to accuse her outright. It was to plant the seed, to make her wonder what I knew, to force her into mistakes. Over the next week, I noticed a shift. Karen wasn't as smug as before. She still strutted, still handed out her HOA notices like confetti, but she was nervous. Her eyes flicked around more, her words came out sharper, more defensive. She even started holding late-night meetings at her house, gathering her little HOA loyalists to whisper about neighborhood safety and community standards. I knew what she was really doing, trying to build a wall of support before the truth hit her, like a freight train. But while she schemed, I worked. I reached out to a contact in the fire marshal's office, gave him the investigator's report, and asked for a discreet follow-up. He agreed. Within days, Karen's name was floating in official circles. Even if she didn't know it yet. At the same time, I filed a quiet request for the HOA's financial records. As a homeowner, I had the right to review them. Karen tried to delay, of course, sending me a snippy email about processing times and privacy concerns. But I didn't back down. I sent a certified letter citing state law. She had no choice. When the records arrived, I spent hours combing through them. Buried between maintenance fees and landscaping costs, I found something interesting: payments to a contractor who didn't seem to exist. Thousands of dollars, marked vaguely as neighborhood improvements. Fraud. It wasn't proof of arson, but it was proof of something else. Karen wasn't just corrupt in spirit, she was corrupt in practice. One evening, as I sat on my porch reviewing the papers, Karen marched over, her heels clicking against the pavement like gunshots. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she snapped, skipping any pretense of politeness. I closed the folder slowly, met her gaze, and said nothing. "You're harassing me," she continued, jabbing a finger at me. "Asking for records, talking to investigators, this has to stop." "Karen," I said, my voice even, "you're confusing harassment with accountability." Her face flushed. "You're not going to win this. The HOA stands with me. The neighbors stand with me. You're alone in this." I chuckled softly. "We'll see." She stomped off, muttering under her breath. But as I watched her retreat, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not much, but enough. The next day, I got a call from the fire marshal. "We've reviewed everything. We're moving forward with a case. You'll be contacted for a formal statement soon." My chest tightened, not with nerves, but with satisfaction. The wheels were turning. That evening, I walked to the ruins of the barn. My daughter joined me, her small hand slipping into mine. She looked up at me, eyes wide and sad. "Why would she do this, Dad?" I squeezed her hand gently. "Because some people think rules matter more than people. Because some people are cruel when they think no one will stop them." "Are you going to stop her?" she asked. I looked down at her, then at the ashes around us. Yes, I am. 2 nights later, there was a knock at my door. Late, too late for a friendly visit. I opened it to find Karen on my porch, her eyes wild, her hands shaking slightly. "You need to drop this," she hissed. "Do you hear me? If you don't, you'll regret it." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Is that a threat, Karen?" She blinked, realizing her mistake. No, I just mean you'll make things worse for yourself." I held her gaze, letting the silence stretch until she squirmed. Then I said softly, "Karen, do you know what I do for a living?" Her brow furrowed. "You're some kind of lawyer?" I smiled faintly. "Something like that." Then I shut the door. On the other side, I heard her shaky breath, followed by hurried footsteps retreating into the night. She didn't know the full truth yet, but she was starting to sense it. And when she finally learned that the man she'd been tormenting wasn't just another homeowner, but a federal judge with the power to tear her little empire apart, that's when her world would truly collapse. As about to learn, I was her judge. The morning the fire marshal came back to take his formal statement, I knew the tide was turning. He walked my property slowly, snapping photos of the ruins, jotting notes, nodding occasionally like the pieces were falling neatly into place. When we finished, he closed his notepad and said, "Mr. Mitchell, we have enough to pursue this. It won't be quick, but it's moving in the right direction. Whoever did this, they're in trouble." I thanked him, shook his hand, and watched him drive off. For the first time since the fire, I felt something other than anger. I felt resolve, but Karen must have felt it too, because that very afternoon she went on the attack. I came home to find a flurry of flyers stuffed in my mailbox and taped to my gate. Each one was the same. Warning: unsafe. Neighbor: this individual has brought danger to our community through neglect and lies. The HOA will not tolerate threats to neighborhood safety. And there, at the bottom, was her signature. I stood there, holding the paper, my jaw tightening. She was desperate. Smearing me publicly was her way of rallying support before the truth hit her. Neighbors started whispering. Some crossed the street when I walked by. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Karen had poisoned them with her lies, and for now, they believed her. But I didn't fight back. Not yet. Instead, I pulled the flyer off the gate, smoothed it flat, and pinned it to the corkboard in my office beside the HOA's financial records and the fire investigator's report. Every time Karen tried to bury me, she only handed me more ammunition. That weekend, Karen hosted a special HOA meeting. Normally, these gatherings drew maybe half a dozen bored neighbors. But this time, the clubhouse parking lot overflowed with cars. Curious, I went too not to argue but to listen. Karen stood at the front of the room, flanked by her loyalists. She spoke loudly, dramatically, her hands slicing the air with every accusation. "This man refuses to follow the rules," she announced, pointing at me as if I were on trial. "His negligence nearly cost us all. That fire could have spread. He's a danger to our homes, to our families." Gasps rippled through the room. A few neighbors nodded nervously. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded, letting her dig her hole deeper. Then one man in the back raised his hand. "Do you have proof he caused the fire?" Karen froze for half a second. "Everyone knows his barn was falling apart. It was inevitable." That's when I stood up, calmly, slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match her theatrics. I simply said, "The fire marshal disagrees." The room went silent. Karen's eyes flashed. But before she could snap back, I added, "An official investigation is underway. I suggest everyone here be very careful about repeating baseless accusations. Slander is no small matter." I let my gaze sweep the room, landing on each neighbor one by one. A few shifted uncomfortably. Others looked down. Karen tried to laugh it off. See? Threats. This is exactly what I'm talking about. He intimidates people. But the seed of doubt was already planted. And judging by the murmurs, not everyone was convinced by her performance anymore. I walked out before she could say another word. My silence was more powerful than any argument I could have made. That night, Karen struck again, a rock through my window. No note, no name, just shattered glass and a warning. My daughter screamed when she heard it. I held her close, whispered that everything would be all right, but inside my blood boiled. Karen was escalating. She thought she could scare me into submission. What she didn't realize was that every escalation only made her case worse. Every action was another brick in the wall closing in around her. The next day, I met with my attorney, a trusted colleague from years past. I handed him the binder I'd compiled, the investigator's report, the camera footage of her SUV, Henderson's eyewitness statement, the suspicious HOA payments, and now, the flyers. He flipped through it slowly, his eyes narrowing with each page. Finally, he set it down and looked at me. This is solid, he said. Arson, fraud, harassment. She won't walk away from this untouched. Good, I replied evenly, because she's not just going to face the HOA anymore. She's going to face me in court. My attorney smirked. She has no idea who she's up against, does she? I shook my head. Not yet. Over the next week, Karen doubled down. She knocked on doors, spread rumors, sent more HOA notices for petty things, my lawn length, a single light bulb out on my porch, even the placement of my trash bin, but I didn't argue. I didn't resist. I let her bury herself under her own arrogance. At night, I sat in my office, preparing, drafting motions, reviewing case law, planning every step like a chess match. Karen thought she was still playing checkers, short moves, quick wins. She didn't see the trap closing in around her. The breaking point came one Friday evening. I was sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea when Karen stormed over, her face red, her words already spilling out like venom. You think you're so smart, she hissed. But you don't scare me. You don't scare the HOA. You'll regret crossing me. I let her rant. Let her spit every insult she could muster. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I leaned forward and said quietly, Karen, you should choose your words carefully. You never know when they might be repeated in a courtroom. Her face drained of color. For a moment, just a moment, she looked like a cornered animal. Then she recovered, jabbing her finger at me. You don't get to threaten me. I stood, towering over her, but I didn't raise my voice. This isn't a threat. It's a promise. Actions have consequences, Karen, and yours are about to catch up to you. I turned and walked back inside, leaving her sputtering on the porch through the window. I watched her storm off into the night, her pace frantic, her shoulders tense. She was rattled. Good. Because she still didn't know the truth. She didn't know that the man she'd been waging war against wasn't just a stubborn neighbor. She didn't know she was about to step into the courtroom of a federal judge. And in my courtroom, mercy is earned, not given. The knock at my door came just after sunrise. My daughter peeked out the window, nervous, until she saw who it was, my attorney. He walked in with a leather case under his arm and a quiet determination in his step. Ready? He asked. I nodded. It's time. We spread the papers across my kitchen table. Subpoenas for HOA financial records. Motions to depose Henderson. A demand for surveillance footage from nearby street cameras. It was a net, wide and inescapable, designed to catch every lie Karen had told. This isn't just a civil suit anymore, my attorney explained. We're putting her in a corner she can't talk her way out of. Fraud, harassment, possibly arson. Once discovery starts, she's finished. I picked up the first subpoena, turning it over in my hands. All the sleepless nights, all the anger, all the patience that had led to this. Serve them, I said quietly, and with that, the game changed. Karen must have thought the flyers and HOA meetings would be the extent of our battle. She wasn't prepared for the cold, heavy weight of legal documents being dropped on her doorstep. By noon, the process server called me. It's done. She didn't take it well. I could imagine it, her arrogant smirk twisting into shock, then fury as she realized this wasn't neighborhood gossip anymore. This was real. This was court. The first cracks in her armor began to show almost immediately. That same evening, I saw her pacing in her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp and panicked. The next day, 2 HOA board members resigned suddenly. No explanation, just terse emails sent to the neighborhood mailing list. I didn't need to guess why. They knew the storm was coming. And they didn't want to be standing next to Karen when it hit. The neighbors noticed too. The same people who had avoided me days earlier now lingered at the mailbox a little longer, asking cautious questions. Is it true she's being sued? One whispered, I heard the HOA funds are under investigation. Another murmured, I didn't confirm, but I didn't deny. I simply smiled and said, the truth always comes out. It was enough. The rumors spread on their own, this time not against me, but against her. Karen had built her kingdom on fear and intimidation. Now her subjects were slipping away, one by one. Still, she didn't give up. Karen marched up to my door late one night, pounding on it with the side of her fist. When I opened it, she shoved a stack of papers at me. A counterclaim. Her voice shook with rage. You think you can scare me with your pathetic lawsuit? I'll bury you in court. I'll take your house, your land, everything. I glanced down at the papers, then back at her. Calm. Controlled. Karen, I said evenly, you're welcome to try. But the difference between us? I don't bluff. Her face twitched, the bravado cracking for just a moment before she spun on her heel and stormed off into the night. The following week, discovery began. My attorney filed motions demanding every HOA receipt, every bank statement, every board meeting transcript. Henderson was subpoenaed for deposition, and though he looked pale and uneasy, he didn't resist. That was when Karen made her biggest mistake yet. Instead of complying, she stonewalled, delayed, claimed the records were lost, tried to argue that certain documents were confidential. The judge wasn't amused. At the first hearing, Karen strutted in like she owned the courtroom, heels clicking against the tile. But when the judge leaned over his bench and said, Mrs. Langford, you will produce the requested documents within 14 days or face sanctions, I saw her composure falter. For the first time, Karen realized she wasn't the one in control anymore. The neighbors who had once cheered her now whispered in corners of the courthouse. I caught fragments. Did you hear she's refusing to hand over the books? Something's not right. Maybe she was behind the fire. She's been living too high for too long. Her empire of fear was collapsing, brick by brick. Back at home, my daughter asked me quietly, Dad, what if she doesn't stop? What if she does something worse? I put my arm around her. She's already trapped. Every move she makes just tightens the rope. Trust me, she won't escape this. I said it to comfort her. But deep down, I knew it was true. 2 weeks later, the deadline arrived. Karen's attorney staggered into the courthouse with a half-empty box of records, claiming it was all they could find. But as soon as my attorney lifted the lid, his eyes lit up. He slid one document out carefully and handed it to me. It was a bank statement. A large transfer, tens of thousands of dollars, pulled directly from HOA funds and sent to an account under Karen's maiden name, clear as day. Black and white. Fraud, written in numbers and ink. I felt my pulse quicken as I stared at it. After all the chaos, all the fear, here it was, the smoking gun. My attorney leaned close and whispered, "This isn't just a civil case anymore. This is criminal." I looked up toward Karen's table. She was laughing with her lawyer, confident, arrogant as ever. She had no idea what was about to hit her, because in less than 24 hours, that document would be handed over to the district attorney's office, and Karen was about to find herself not in an HOA squabble, but in a courtroom at 2 the morning started with a phone call I'll never forget. "Judge," my attorney said, his tone steady but urgent. "The district attorney just called me. They're opening a criminal case. Wire fraud, misappropriation of HOA funds, possible arson enhancement once the fire investigation wraps." For a moment, I just sat there, silent. All the anger, all the patience, all the waiting, it was finally coming full circle. "Did they issue charges yet?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. "But it's coming. And when it does, Karen won't just be dealing with angry neighbors anymore. She'll be staring down the state of Texas." I felt a slow, grim smile tug at the corner of my mouth. It was about time. The news spread faster than wildfire. By noon, the local gossip channels had picked it up. HOA president under criminal investigation blared across social media feeds. Neighbors who once whispered in secrecy now spoke openly on front lawns. "I always thought she was too slick with the money," one said, shaking her head. "Remember when she funded that new sign? Where'd that money come from?" Another added, "Even Henderson, the man who had once been her biggest defender, was spotted leaving a courthouse side door, his face pale and drawn. Word was he'd flipped. He'd agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. Karen's fortress of loyalty was crumbling. Of course, Karen didn't go quietly. 2 nights after the story broke, she called an emergency HOA meeting in the community center. I went, not to participate, but to watch. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Karen stood at the front, her trademark red blazer buttoned tight, her voice dripping with false confidence. "These allegations are lies," she snapped, waving her manicured hands in the air. "This is a smear campaign orchestrated by a bitter man who thinks he's above the rules." All eyes shifted toward me. I didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stared back at her, calm, steady, unshaken. Karen continued, her voice rising. "Do you really think I would burn down a barn? Do you think I would steal your money? Look around you. Our neighborhood is thriving because of me, because I enforce the rules." But something was different this time. The crowd wasn't nodding. They weren't clapping. They weren't cowed. Instead, whispers rippled through the room. Disbelief, anger, betrayal. One woman finally stood. "If you're so innocent, Karen, why are the feds looking at your bank records?" Karen froze. Her smile faltered for just a second before she plastered it back on. "Fake news," she hissed, but the damage was done. For the first time, Karen wasn't in control of the room. The very next morning, the day I made it official, press conference, cameras, microphones, lined up like bayonets. The district attorney stepped up to the podium, a tall man with a voice that carried like thunder. "Today," he announced, "we are filing formal charges against Karen Langford, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Charges include wire fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of funds totaling over $75,000. Additional charges related to arson are under review pending the fire marshal's final report." The flash of cameras lit the air like lightning. Reporters shouted questions. Neighbors gasped and muttered. And somewhere in the crowd, I caught sight of Karen. Her face was ashen, her jaw set, but her eyes, Her eyes betrayed the truth. For the first time, Karen Langford looked afraid. That night, I thought it was over. I thought the law had her cornered, that the slow grind of justice would do the rest. But Karen wasn't finished. At 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. My security lights flicked on, flooding the yard in a cold, white glow. I reached for the baseball bat I kept by the door, then looked out the window. There she was, Karen, standing in my driveway. Her red blazer was gone, replaced with a dark hoodie pulled tight over her head. In her hand, I could see the faint glint of metal, something she clenched like a weapon. For a long, terrifying moment, she just stared up at my window. Then, slowly, she raised her other hand and pointed at me. Not a word, not a sound, just that single, deliberate gesture, as if to say, "This isn't over." My blood ran cold, because at that moment, I realized something. Karen wasn't just fighting to keep her HOA crown anymore. She was fighting for her life. And desperate people do desperate things. LD take away her freedom. I didn't sleep that night. After watching her vanish into the dark, I sat in the living room with the lights off, gripping that old baseball bat like it was the only thing keeping me alive. Every sound outside, the wind rattling the trees, a dog barking in the distance, had me on edge. By morning, I had already made the call. A friend in law enforcement, someone I'd worked with during my years on the bench, came out and installed a discreet camera system around my property. Motion sensors, night vision, the works. My daughter begged me to send her to stay with her grandparents for a while, but I shook my head. "No," I said firmly. "We're not running." Not from her. But in my gut, I knew Karen had crossed a line, and once someone does that, there's no going back. The first incident happened 3 nights later. It was just after midnight when the cameras triggered an alert on my phone. I pulled it up, and there she was, Karen, creeping along the edge of my fence line, flashlight in hand. She wasn't wearing her usual blazer or heels. This time, she looked feral. Hair tied back, eyes darting nervously, hands trembling. She stopped near my barn's charred remains, crouched, and pulled something from her bag. A gas can. My stomach dropped. She poured it over the blackened rubble, then set the can down, fumbling with what looked like matches. But before she could strike one, a floodlight snapped on from the motion sensor. Karen froze, blinded by the sudden glare. For a long second, she stood there, caught like a thief in the night. Then she bolted, sprinting back into the shadows. I called the sheriff immediately, sent them the footage, and filed a report. But by the time deputies patrolled the neighborhood, she was long gone. The fire marshal added the incident to his investigation file. The DA's office called it invaluable evidence. But me? I called it something else. Proof that Karen wasn't just dangerous. She was desperate. The neighborhood's mood shifted overnight. Gone were the whispers about my barn lowering property values. Now mothers walked their kids to school in pairs, eyes scanning nervously. Neighbors who once avoided me now crossed the street to talk. "Did you see the cameras on his fence? She's losing it. I don't feel safe anymore. First she burned down his barn, now she's sneaking around at night. What if she does it to us next?" Karen had ruled by fear. Now that fear was turning back on her. Meanwhile, the DA pressed forward. Henderson's deposition revealed even more corruption. Fake invoices, inflated maintenance fees, personal vacations disguised as HOA conferences. Every document painted Karen deeper into a corner, but corners make people lash out. One evening, as I drove home from town, my truck jolted violently. At first I thought I'd hit debris, but when I pulled over, the truth became clear. My rear tire had been slashed clean through. The mechanic confirmed it wasn't wear, wasn't random. It was sabotage. Deliberate. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. I stared at the shredded rubber, fists tightening until my knuckles went white. She wanted to scare me, maybe even hurt me, but she'd miscalculated. Every stunt, every threat, every desperate act, it was more evidence. And in my world, evidence is everything. Still, I couldn't ignore the gnawing thought that circled my mind every night. What if she comes after my daughter? I doubled security, kept lights on, sat awake until sunrise, listening. And then came the night everything reached its boiling point. It was storming, rain hammering the roof, wind howling through the trees. My cameras pinged again. I grabbed my phone, heart thundering, and pulled up the live feed. Karen, soaked to the bone, hair plastered against her face, moving fast across my yard. But this time, she wasn't carrying a gas can. She was carrying a crowbar. I bolted upright, grabbed the bat, and sprinted to the door. My daughter's voice trembled behind me. "Dad, don't." But I wasn't about to let her tear into my home. Not tonight. Not ever. I yanked open the door just as lightning split the sky, and there she was, standing less than 20 feet away, crowbar glinting in her grip, her eyes locked on mine. Wild, unhinged. For a moment, neither of us moved. The storm raged around us, wind whipping, thunder cracking. Then she lifted the crowbar. And took her first step toward me. Rain pounded the roof like a war drum. I gripped the bat tighter, watching Karen inch closer, the crowbar heavy in her hands. Her eyes gleamed with something darker than anger. It was desperation, pure and unfiltered. "Karen," I called over the thunder, steady but firm. "Put it down." She sneered. "You ruined me. You think you're untouchable, Judge? You're not. I'll take back everything you stole from me." Lightning cracked, illuminating her twisted expression. My daughter's voice trembled behind me. "Dad, the police are on their way." "Stay inside." But I couldn't. If I retreated, Karen would only push harder. This had to end. "Karen," I repeated, taking one step forward, "you're already finished. Every move you make is evidence. Drop the crowbar. Walk away." For a split second, I thought she might listen. Her grip loosened, her eyes flickered. Then she screamed, a raw, guttural sound, and charged. Time slowed. Her feet splashed through puddles. Her arm swung back with the crowbar. My muscles tensed, ready for impact. And then red and blue lights flooded the driveway. Sirens wailed. Tires screeched as two sheriff's cruisers skidded to a stop. Drop IT. Now, deputies leapt from their vehicles, weapons drawn. Karen froze, crowbar mid-swing, eyes wide in shock. "Drop it." The deputy repeated. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a furious scream, she hurled the crowbar to the ground. It clattered against the wet pavement. Deputies swarmed her, forcing her to the ground, cuffing her wrists as she thrashed and spat curses. "You think this changes anything?" She shrieked, rain mixing with tears on her face. "You can't stop me. I still have people. You hear me? People who believe in me." Her words sent a chill down my spine, even in cuffs. She wasn't done. The deputies pulled her up, soaking wet, hair wild, face twisted with rage. I stepped forward, my bat still in hand, but one deputy raised a palm. "We've got her. Judge, you're safe now." Safe. I wasn't sure that word meant anything anymore. Karen was hauled to the cruiser, screaming the entire way. My daughter clung to me, trembling, as we watched the red taillights disappear into the storm. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, I felt something colder, dread, because she wasn't wrong. People like Karen don't rise to power alone. They build networks, alliances, loyalists. And if she had people still in her corner, then this war wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, The DA called me personally. We're stacking the charges, he said. Trespassing, attempted assault with a deadly weapon, violation of restraining order. Combined with the fraud charges, she's looking at serious time. Good, I said flatly. She won't be able to post bail. Not with her accounts frozen. She'll sit in county until trial. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I stared out my window at the smoldering remains of my barn, unease gnawing at me. Do me a favor, I said quietly. Keep her isolated. She's more dangerous than she looks. The DA paused. We're already ahead of you. That evening, the neighborhood felt different, quieter. For the first time in weeks, kids rode their bikes again. Neighbors walked their dogs without glancing over their shoulders. People stopped me at the mailbox, shaking my hand, whispering thanks. She's gone now, right? One asked nervously. Not gone, I corrected. Just caged. They nodded, but I could see the unease in their eyes. They'd heard her final words too. I still have people. Days passed. For the first time in months, I slept a little easier. The cameras stayed quiet. No midnight trespassing, no slashed tires, no shadows at the window. But then, the letters started. Anonymous envelopes slipped into mailboxes across the neighborhood. Each one stamped with the HOA logo, each one containing the same message. Karen was framed. The judge is the real criminal. Stand with the HOA, stand with the truth. My stomach dropped as I read it. The words were bold, underlined, accusatory. And though unsigned, I recognized the style, the clipped sentences, the capitalized threats. Karen may have been behind bars, but her hand was still reaching out. The day I called again the next day, "We've got a problem," he said grimly. Karen's cell phone records showed dozens of calls in the last week. She's been using other inmates to pass messages out. Recruiting. Recruiting? I repeated. He sighed. Judge, I don't want to alarm you, but Karen isn't just fighting her case. She's building a defense on the outside. She's trying to rally your neighbors against you. And if even a handful side with her, things could get ugly. I gripped the phone tighter, staring at the charred ruins through my window. Karen was in jail. Her reputation shattered. Her freedom gone, and still, she was finding ways to fight. That night, as I checked the cameras one last time before bed, I saw something that froze my blood. Not Karen. She was locked up tight, but a man, hooded and broad-shouldered, standing at the edge of my yard. He didn't move, didn't approach, just stood there in the shadows. Watching when the floodlights snapped on, he didn't run. He simply raised a hand and pointed at my house. Just like Karen had. Then he disappeared into the night. My chest tightened. My daughter stirred upstairs, and I realized something chilling. Karen might be behind bars. But her war was only just beginning. The morning after the hooded man appeared on my property, I knew the storm wasn't over. The cameras had caught only a silhouette. But the intent was clear. Karen might be caged. But she had disciples willing to fight in her name. I replayed the footage again and again, my jaw tightening with each loop. My daughter stood in the doorway, arms crossed, fear written across her face. Dad, she whispered, when does it stop? I didn't answer. Because the truth was, it didn't. Not yet. The neighborhood cracked down the middle within days. Half the residents were relieved Karen was gone, finally able to breathe without her constant harassment. But the other half, her faithful, clung to her narrative like it was gospel. They whispered about conspiracies, muttered about corrupt judges, and fabricated charges. At the HOA mailbox station, I overheard two men arguing. She stole from us, Mark. The DA has proof. Proof? Or a setup? You think it's coincidence her barn burned down and suddenly she's pointing fingers? Nah, the judge framed her. He wanted her out. I didn't step in. Not yet. But their words cut deep. Karen's poison was spreading. Then came the vandalism. Spray painted across my fence one morning. Free Karen. Another day, someone dumped trash bags across my driveway, scattering flyers with the same accusation. The judge is the real criminal. It was childish, petty, but dangerous. Because behind every act was a person willing to fight for her. The DA warned me over the phone, she's sowing discord. If she can't win in court, she win in the streets. That's how people like her survive. I looked out at my ruined barn, the ashes washed gray from rain, and nodded grimly. Then it's time I stopped waiting for survival, I said. It's time I went on offense. That night, I gathered every shred of evidence I had. Surveillance footage, anonymous letters, vandalism photos. I sent copies to the DA's office, but I also started something else, my own case file, because this wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was about the network she built. The rot she planted in my neighborhood. If she had an army, I needed to dismantle it piece by piece. The first crack came from within. Henderson, the same man who had once stood by her side, approached me one evening as I locked my gate. His shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. I can't do it anymore, he muttered. I studied him carefully. Do what? Cover for her. Pretend I don't know where the money went. Pretend I don't know what she did to your barn. His voice broke. She ordered it. Paid someone cash to torch it. I didn't want to believe it, but I was there when she bragged about it. My pulse quickened. And you'll testify to that? He nodded. If it means ending this nightmare, yes. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint flicker of hope. But Karen wasn't idle. From behind bars, she managed to rally her loyalists into something louder, uglier. One Saturday morning, I opened my curtains to find a crowd marching down the street, signs reading "Justice for Karen" and "Down with Corruption." They stopped outside my house, chanting, shouting, waving their fists. My daughter clung to me, terrified, as the mob grew louder. Deputies eventually dispersed them, but the message was clear. Karen's army wasn't just whispering anymore. They were mobilizing, and I knew what came next. Escalation. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, my case file spread open, my bat resting within reach. My daughter finally broke the silence. Dad, why don't we just move? She asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her, the one person in this world I couldn't fail. My blood boiled at the thought of Karen winning, of her forcing us out of the home my family built for 3 generations. Because, I said firmly, this is our home. And if we run, she wins. I won't let her win. My daughter nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. She didn't argue again. The next morning, I made my choice. I drove straight to the DA's office, not just with evidence, but with a demand. File charges against her loyalists, I said, slamming the folder on his desk. Conspiracy, harassment, intimidation. They're part of this, and you know it. The DA studied me, concern flickering in his eyes. Judge, this is dangerous. Going after her is one thing. Going after her supporters, they threaten my home, my daughter. They trespassed, vandalized, marched on my property. That's not loyalty. That's criminal. For a long moment, the DA said nothing. Then he leaned back and sighed. All right, he said. But you realize this makes you a target. I met his gaze, unflinching. I already am. That evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset bleed into night. For the first time, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like a hunter, ready to strike. But as the cicadas hummed and the air grew thick with silence, I caught movement across the street. 3 figures standing together, watching my house. One of them raised a phone to his ear. The others crossed their arms, their eyes locked on me. And then, from the shadows, a fourth figure stepped forward. Not Karen. She was still in custody, but someone else. Someone new, a man I'd never seen before, and the way he smiled at me, slow and deliberate, sent a chill crawling down my spine. Because in that moment, I realized something horrifying. Karen's army wasn't just neighbors anymore. She had recruited outsiders. I never thought a burned barn would turn into this, a full-scale war between me and HOA Karen and the army she built from fear and lies. But standing in that courtroom for the last time, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every neighbor who had been bullied, intimidated, or silenced by her reign. Karen sat across the room, her wrists shackled, her once flashy jewelry and designer outfits replaced by a dull orange jumpsuit. Yet, even in chains, she smirked. That same smug expression she had worn the day she screamed at my daughter. The day she ordered my barn burned. The day she thought she won. But today, justice wasn't on her side. The DA laid it out clearly. The financial records, the surveillance footage, the testimony of her former allies. Henderson's words hit the hardest. She bragged about it, he said firmly, staring right at Karen. Said the judge wouldn't dare touch her. That she'd burn the barn and could burn more if she wanted. Karen didn't flinch, but the jury did. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about titles or status or being a federal judge. I talked about being a father, a homeowner, a neighbor who just wanted peace. She thought fear was power, I said, my voice steady. She thought if she screamed loud enough, destroyed enough, people would bow down to her. But power isn't built on fire. It's built on truth. And the truth is, Karen tried to destroy my family. She failed. And she'll keep failing because we stand together. For the first time, I saw Karen's smirk falter. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. On every count. The judge, not me. But a colleague sentenced her to years in prison. Not months. Not probation. Years. As the gavel struck, Karen's army, those who had marched and vandalized and whispered her lies, sat in stunned silence. Some cried, some cursed, but most simply hung their heads, realizing they had hitched themselves to a sinking ship. Karen was led out of the courtroom, her eyes darting to mine. For a split second, her mask slipped, and what I saw wasn't arrogance. It was fear. The weeks that followed brought a wave of relief. The graffiti stopped. The flyers vanished. The figures watching my house disappeared. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began knocking on my door, some to apologize, others just to say thank you. Henderson moved away quietly, finally free from her grip. The few diehards who still muttered her name faded into the background, powerless without their leader. And my daughter? She smiled again. For the first time in months, she played in the yard without glancing over her shoulder. The barn was gone, yes. But in its place, I planted new corn. A new season. A new start. One evening, as the sun dipped below the fields, my daughter asked, "Dad, do you think she'll come back?" I paused, looking at the horizon, then at her. "Maybe someday she'd try," I admitted. "But it won't matter. Because now she knows." Knows what? That fear doesn't work on us. That this family doesn't break. That no matter how much fire she brings, I pointed to the young corn sprouting in neat rows. We'll always grow back stronger. My daughter smiled, and for the first time, I felt the weight lift completely from my shoulders. Karen had lost and we had won. And that, neighbors, is how it all ended, with Karen behind bars. Her so-called army scattered and peace finally restored to my home. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that stories like this aren't rare. Across neighborhoods, across towns, there are battles, betrayals, and unbelievable HOA nightmares just waiting to be told. If you've been hooked on this wild ride, make sure you stick around. There are plenty more stories where this came from. Subscribe, hit the bell, and join me next time here on HOA Stories, because trust me, you won't believe what happens next.